Um, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Universal Healthcare Lab, and we will be discussing pay-for-performance schemes for healthcare, specifically for tuberculosis. Now, um, the idea is to move the discourse forward. We are aware that SIBS or impact investing in health is not moving. The discourse is not moving very fast in the Philippines, and we thought we might help it along. Now we have some traction with the USAID projects, but they couldn't make it for this specific time slot. But they're willing to work with us in the next installments of this. So ang objective natin, our objective for this afternoon is just to explore the broad, getting the lay of the land, identify national and subnational institutions and financing arrangements that influence TB outcomes, explore national and provincial TB endgame scenarios, and then map out health and financing ecosystem that determine TB outcomes. So Dr. KM Magtubo will be discussing um, some some of her thoughts, sharing some of her thoughts with us this afternoon. She's a physician, former doctor to the barrio. She has a master's degree in public management from DAP, and then she got her MD from UP, University of the Philippines. And she's been doing a lot of work in innovation, telemedicine, and more recently, impact investing. Ako naman, I work full-time. My first job out of med school was in health financing, particularly microinsurance. And then I also work full-time for a tuberculosis project for policy and finance. No? So we work with DOH and also LGUs. So I'll just give some overview of some concepts just so that we will have um, shared definitions or shared working definitions, at least at the start. So first, bonds. Bonds have been used to finance specific objectives. The first global bond sale of the Philippines was launched in 2017. And it's a 25-year bond. Also in 2017, an NGO issued 2 billion pesos worth of bonds for microfinancing. So they raised 2 million pesos. They worked with BPI, Bank of the Philippine Islands, and then ASA, which is the microfinance institution, in turn used this 2 billion pesos for their lending operations. So they make it circulate as loans, they earn interest income, and then after a certain period, they pay back the bond. Yeah, so for ASA, people can buy the ASA bond, it goes to BPI, and it gets relent. The money gets relent through microfinance, and then ASA collects interest and then pays back the bond buyers after a certain period. So for development impact bonds or social impact bonds, basically this works for interventions, preventive interventions that can result in a significant savings for the prevented condition. In our case, if we were to talk about tuberculosis, more specific application could be multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, which the regular tuberculosis costs roughly 6,000 pesos to treat, but the multiple drug resistant tuberculosis costs some 200,000 pesos to treat per patient, and it takes much longer, and government is footing the bill for most of the MDR patients. So that's 200,000 pesos per patient, and government pays for that. So if government can prevent MDR by investing better in TB program implementation so that patients don't drop out, then there could be benefits. Those are the conceptually the benefits. Yeah. So one scenario for tuberculosis is kunwari, one scenario, just so that it's less abstract. The regional director of, say, Region 4A, no, Calabarzon, can say, oh, about to spend again another 20 million pesos per year on treating MDR-TB. No? So in 5 years, that's 100 million pesos on MDR-TB, which is actually preventable. Now, if only somebody can prevent it, no, then I won't have to spend that on cure. No? So ang option is for the regional director to release a tender. No? DOH will pay a contractor in 2027 if they can reduce MDR patients to a certain amount, no? Lower than the forecasted amount if they did not ramp up or upgrade the preventive services. So here's an example of a bid, no, sa Pilipinas. So they could release a bid, a tender. In Australia, this is an actual tender for a social impact bond, no, released by the Victorian government, the state of Victoria in Australia. So this is what it would look like if, say, DOH released a tender for a bid. Ngayon, who will submit a tender for this? No? And how will it be paid for upfront? No? So for Calabarzon, there's actually one TB center, no, run by the De La Salle University Medical Center. They're a research center with decades of research experience. So they can, here's one scenario is that they respond, they say, hey, we can do that. No, we're familiar with the preventive interventions, we can implement it, but who will pay us? No, we cannot advance the money all the way up to 2027 and then just wait to be paid in 2027. So we need somebody to fund the interventions in 2023 upfront. So one scenario is that somebody organizes an impact fund and works so that there can be a mechanism for taking in funds upfront. No? It can be through BPI Foundation, BPI Bank. It could be a bank or some other entity that is authorized to float such instruments. No? Often these are banks. No? And then that money, if it's called the lung health bond, no? And then there's they can peg a certain interest rate per annum, then they take in investments, release it to De La Salle, and then De La Salle implements the prevention interventions. Okay, and then people can start investing in that. No, it can be individual investors or institutional investors. And then if we fast forward to 2028, the DOH can say, okay, so how did we do? Did we actually reduce incidence rates? And how much did we spend? No? So they go through the statistics, and then if the certain targets were achieved, then they release the fund. No? So in internal to DOH naman, what they would do is they would hold on to the funds that they would otherwise spend on a yearly basis for treatment. No? Internally, they'd have to figure out how to set that aside without it going back to the revolving funds. No? Otherwise, by the year 2028, they will have no way of paying back to BPI. Yun. But so that's one scenario. But the challenge is there are several challenges. One is figuring out the metrics and then developing transparency mechanism, and then finding CSO capacity to implement the interventions. Also, it requires more sophisticated government thinking and budgeting, no? Because government is used to just annual expenses. No? And then next year, you just expense out again. No? So saving, in ways, there is little incentive for government to save. No? And this is a sophisticated way of saving, but it actually helps integrate the system. So yun yung scenario. Um, so maybe KM, you can share your thoughts on what we might, if all goes well, actually, we
But
might be able to.
I have a question,
Oh, sure,
Elmer,
sure.
before KM proceeds with her example. Um, so in the model that you presented, this graph, showing government expenditure, then cost with the SI savings and all returns to investor. And does it tell us exactly how the SIB can reduce government expenses? So where is this cost saving? Where does it come from? I mean, well, we know that government is inherently wasteful, but for specific projects, where would the cost savings come from?
Sige, for tuberculosis specifically, MDR TB cases usually come out a result from patients who drop out. No, so they undergo treatment. The regular treatment for TB is 6 months. No, if you do not complete the 6 months, then the bug in your lung is only partially eliminated. No, and the 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 germs that are in your lungs that remain after partial treatment can evolve resistance. No, so you're actually not treated. You stop. No, um, for a while you have stopped coughing, but you're not aware that the bugs that have not been eliminated in your lungs are now resistant. No, and then if they give you more drugs, um, it's possible that the germs in your lungs will not respond to the medicines.
Mm-hmm.
So now they have to give you more potent drugs, no, and
Correct.
for a longer
Mm-hmm.
period, up to 2 years.
And that's more
That's
expensive.
and that's more expensive. No,
Okay.
if only
So,
government could make sure that you don't drop out every day for 6 months. No, so by reducing the dropout rate by 6 months, for sure fully treated ka na, and therefore wala nang MDR. There's no risk or very low risk of drug-resistant TB because all
okay.
of the bugs were eliminated.
So it's similar to what China was doing regarding rehabilitating drug addicts, So they used behavioral economics concepts to incentivize people to return to the treatment center uh, in I think I don't know how many days intervals, how many days in between treatment, so that they can improve the outcomes of these patients. So I think if we can look at incentivizing people showing up for treatment for 6 months, then that can probably increase success rates dramatically. So
You're, you're right. The interventions are largely behavioral, no? Because the government
mhm,
provides the supply of medicines. No? Now it's the gap there is whether the patients actually take the medicines every day. So you're right. It's behavioral. It's not a
mhm.
supply challenge anymore in general. In terms of medicines, it's more behavioral. No? Making sure that patients take the medicines every day. And there have been innovations using pill boxes that send an SMS,
Mm-hmm.
using cell phones or videos, so that the clinic can monitor, making sure that the patient is taking the medicines every day. So these are the behavioral interventions that are being tried out now.
Okay, great. Because there's a Harvard Business School case called Evive Health or Aviv Health, looking into flu vaccination, coverage, so that they can reduce absences, in the workforce, and especially during winter, and this case is actually based on utility company, power utility, and of course during winter storms and everything, then um, all the more that they should have this flu vaccine. So it's really more on how do you make people want to, to be treated. I mean, something like that, to want to get well. So it's a mixture of policy from, from the firm, from the company, as well as how to share the savings. Because if the company saves on people, on people's health premium, and how can it share that savings with its employees so they can be incentivized to get the flu vaccine, something like that. So it's a very interesting case. It's a very short case. I can send you the case,
Oh,
and you
sige,
can take a
yes.
look at yeah, but don't post it because it's copyrighted.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I might be killed. Anyway. So
Yeah, you know what? You
but
bring up an interesting point because employer-based schemes also makes sense. No, for example, DepEd
mhm,
has over a half a million employees. No, and when a teacher gets tuberculosis, then the children are exposed. No, if they have started
correct. Yeah.
in-person classes. So and for sure, there are uh, tuberculosis cases among teachers. No, so now DepEd can attempt to pilot this say in one province, no, all DepEd teachers ganyan ganyan, no, it's a closed system in that sense, and then the mechanisms of employer employee relationships are there, and then there's actually an incentive for DepEd to get this right also because it reduces exposure of children,
Mm-hmm.
no? um, a really bad scenario is if teacher gets MDR and then infects her own students also with MDR, no? Kasi so if I had active MDR and then I went to class and then taught and then the students catch it from me, it will also cost 200,000 pesos to treat them, no?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think if that happens in DepEd, then there will be a strong incentive for DepEd to attempt to try this, no? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Elmer. And most of the resistance to, to getting treated or getting anything done, because inherently humans are lazy. And so we have to create a system where the friction, from making a decision would be less. So you can remove all these obstacles, mental obstacles, physical obstacles, cognitive obstacles, and anything that can hinder people from getting the treatment that they need, so that you can create, it will result in higher success rates.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Ikaw naman, KM, any thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Very interesting. The example that you gave is very interesting from a very parang high level, no? So parang on a regional level yung problem. And in a way that makes sense because we want economies of scale to make the bond work and the parang the payoff be bigger for whoever is BPI, or maybe we get a pool of catalytic investors in impact funds or something, what have you, even NGOs who can get into pool together the money to prepay for that, or to buy that bond in essence. I was wondering, um, it hasn't been done in the Philippines. I haven't seen it done in any other sector, but actually municipal bonds are a thing. Uh, yung mga the small the small, they're not really small, the cities and municipalities, local government can actually issue bonds.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a thing, a phenomenon, an innovation that's being done in areas like India, Canada, to solve specific health problems of that area. Now I know that parang tuberculosis, it's like the national disease of the Philippines. It's prevalent everywhere. But I suppose, and this is an assumption on my part, that the burden is heavier in some provinces, some cities, some municipalities more than others. So I was thinking, the big the big social impact bond, it sounds nice. It's nice to think about and to see if where it takes us. But would it be possible to start maybe smaller,
Mhm.
somewhere where the pain is closer to the heart, somewhere the pain is more tangible. And if we make it a smaller kind of play, would that be more or less attractive to the investors in the Philippines? Would that be more or less attractive to innovators to participate in? Because if it's smaller, we can even get microfinancing institutions to join, right? If it's smaller, we can the bureaucratic hurdle that we need to overcome is greatly reduced. But then it's a pilot, and we want to go big. So that's what I've been thinking about. Yeah, and then the other thing that came to mind is recently one of my co-DTTBs actually published a report, si Dr. Jeriel De Silos with Dr. JF Hernandez, on FAST and FAST Plus. I'm not sure if you're familiar, maybe you are because USAID.
Mhm.
Uh,
I heard
uh,
about
I,
it now.
I haven't read the entire report, to be honest. I just took a look at their recommendations, and a lot
FAST
of
is
it,
an IT intervention, hindi ba?
it's about, yeah, it's TB also.
Uh-huh.
So I can probably find the report somewhere. Fast or
Mhm.
Fast Plus. And it's the context of the report is they evaluated whether the program should be scaled, right? If it's something, so they piloted it, if it's something that could be applicable to other areas in the Philippines. And a lot of their recommendations revolve around financial targets.
Mhm.
And creating the financing, innovating on the financing mechanism around TB, which we know is largely funded from, derived from public funds. It's really
Yes.
largely government funded. Even in the high income, urban, peri-urban population, the drugs still come from most of the drugs still come from the government. Sure, your private practitioner can give you a prescription to get the quad treatment from mercury drug, but why would you when the drugs are free
Mhm.
in the
Correct.
health centers, right? So even in the high income population, it's still served by the government. So that's an incredibly huge market, and one of their findings is to empower NGOs and private groups to participate in the barrier that is delivering those goods and those services to the bottom of the pyramid, right? So we were talking about case holding and how that's difficult because of the stigma and the barriers, the friction, as Sir Wilfred said, for the patients to stay in the treatment. I think also the availability, because when I was working as a DTTB, it's a real problem when your patient is like on month 4, month 5, and you run out of, because you had to like partition because there
Mhm.
wasn't a lot of planning done by the previous
Mhm.
MHO, let's just say, or your projections were incorrect, or the region's projections were incorrect, or there's a sudden balloon of
Mhm.
TB in kids, and you have to like reproportion everything. So it's also, I think, not just it's a service delivery, product delivery kind of problem as well. So yeah, a lot of rambling rambling thoughts there, but definitely financial interventions, I think, very important. I think an impact bond is a nice and innovative way of tackling this problem. I wonder whether we could maybe reduce the scale. Would that be more attractive? Would that be more parang realistic in a way, something that we can monitor 3 to 5 years and say, hey, this worked in this municipality, we can scale it. And then the third thing is there more to this problem of increasing ballooning multi-drug resistant cases than just case holding? Is it also a logistics problem? Is it also, is there inadequate volume from the pharma side, from the drug producer side, and that's why there's not enough drugs? Yeah, I will pause there because I rambled on and on.
No, no,
I'm gonna pause there.
I think tama. I think ano no, it does make sense kasi one consideration for impact financing is it's complex eh, no?
Mm.
And there are few integrators, no? There are
Mm.
a lot of smart people who understand different pieces of the puzzle, but there are few people who see how they come together, and
Mm.
therefore it is perceived as risky, technically
Mm.
risky, by the experts who see only the fragments. And I think that's about right. No, yung parang you don't know how the next guy does his thing, so that this big system will work, and therefore it is perceived as risky. And I think starting with a small pilot, the risk reduces the risk. No? You have a precedent, you figure it out. No, all of the interdependencies, even the India model that you shared, they're only
Yeah, it's a small
working. Oh, ano,
small
15
community.
blocks.
Yes,
Parang
it's
ano
a
ba yan,
small
15 purok ba
community.
yan?
Yes,
Diba?
in the Philippines
Of course,
parang
they could
15
be
purok lang.
huge. But 1,000 TB patients, 1,000 TB patients, that would be baka medium-sized municipality na
Like
yan
a
actually.
like a fifth or fourth class municipality kung ganyan kadami. Maybe
Pero
third or fourth.
tama, no, yung even for their groundbreaking initiative in India, and it's a small tama because there's so much that you need to figure out. There's so many things that can go wrong. So by keeping it small, you reduce the risk in that sense, no? And then we create the precedents, di ba? Magkaka-manual, ipapaalam sa COA, and then all that, no? The mayor figures out how to float a bond, or the MOUs get, the templates get designed, no? So that the next guy, the next municipality that tries this out will have lower risks. No? Financially, this would be what a DIB would, no? It could be grant-like for the first,
for the first iteration.
Yes. Although we can build in the conditionalities, but actually nobody is exposed to financial risk because it's a grant, no? But we we design the accountability mechanisms already as if it were performance based, di ba? As if the outcomes um the risk for outcomes were borne by the service provider. So i-design na natin as intended, except that there's no financial risk transferred to anyone, di ba? Because it's yeah. And feeling ko nga maybe we should do that. Ako, I get the impression that it's harder to we how should I say? It's harder to get government to absorb the risk of the first iteration totally. Di ba?
Yeah.
Pero sige, nakahanap po kami. We found a grant of say 2 million pesos. Let's start it with 200 TB patients. Yun lang, no? And maybe that accounts for only 5 barangays. So this will be it. No, Mayor. Let's draft an MOU. You'll be the first in the country. No, so bida ka nun, di ba?
Yeah.
And then yung it will also be a smaller financial amount, but we can also pre-test it also with the financial intermediaries, no?
Yes.
They figure out, we simulate real bond float. I don't know, di ba? Either if it's a simulation or an actual small bond float or something.
I mean, if they agree, then if we find someone who will agree to float even like a small bond for a certain number of patients, then that'll be nice. I like the idea of a grant just coming from parang local health systems background, because it's easy to say yes if there's no action parang demanded from you, like if there's really no parang commitment, because it's very low commitment from the local chief executive side, right? It's just, I allow you to do this in my municipality.
And then bida siya kagad. Mayor,
Yeah.
bida ka ha. Ikaw first in the country.
Yeah, that's why I was really looking forward to hearing about Jason's experience working with mayors in, I think, do they have in provinces? I think around Metro Manila yata.
Cebu, I think, if I remember right, he mentioned Cebu also. They have a presence in Cebu, but they're mostly in
So
Luzon.
that would be interesting sana to see, like from an innovator, like ground level innovator, kung how his experience is and to see whether he has been able to prove the theory. I think that's what's important with like a pilot or a first iteration of anything, is that you prove the theory. And I think the theory that's forming right now with our discussion is we can reduce the government's expenditure or the cost of TB care by making case holding more efficient. Parang ganyan. When we hold the cases better, they graduate from TB treatment and they don't progress to MDR. Of course, that's only one route parang of how we get MDR cases. The MDR bug is already circulating around us.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
and preventing parang from that route, parang preventing the boom of MDR cases is a different approach altogether. But I think that's the emerging use case, at least in our discussion. If we improve case holding for the regular, I don't know how to call them. Yung
Mhm.
tagal ko na hindi nakiklinik. But for the regular TB patients, if we improve case holding, we improve outcomes from that area, we reduce progression to MDR. I think the second part is more difficult to prove metrics wise,
Mhm. Mhm.
because the first part is easy to track. That's normal regular tracking, pero yung extrapolation of how many we prevented, we would need to analyze that theory
Mhm.
before we apply it to a larger population, I think.
Mhm.
um yung assignment of causality, the
Mhm.
proof that we caused
Yeah.
that, would be challenging as well. I think Sir Wilfred is about this.
Yeah, but it's really more on who gets to be chosen first,
Mm.
and why is the government not willing to spend, you know, some portion to I switch off my video because I have a
Okay.
bad connection now.
Yeah.
And why is the government unwilling to, to fund a pilot study? So I don't understand why there is a lot of resistance from government. Although I know from other countries like the Rikers Island recidivism social impact bond, it was funded by private sector by Goldman Sachs. So it's not even New York was willing to finance that pilot study, and it did not succeed, by the way. So
Mm.
so this is so it's there's just a lot of things that went wrong to that SIB. So maybe if we can also look at the DOH data on if they have research on why people drop out of the treatment program, so we can understand the financial or maybe geographical or even behavioral challenges
Mhm.
of you know getting the 6-month treatment.
Mhm. Well, sa akin, having worked in the inside of TB project by USAID, and both USAID TB projects are now in year 4, if I remember right. They would have this data that KM mentioned, yung causality. They're very
Mm-mm.
rigorous about that. There's a
Mhm.
theory of change up front, no, at the start, at year 0. There's a theory of change, and then there are indicators, and then we have rigorous quarterly reports. So I think there's significant knowledge base that exists within the USAID projects that we can draw from. No? And then I'm thinking, KM, so you did your your MPP, your mass
NPM.
MPM at DAP. Well, how would it be? Would it work if we attempted to work with with a DTTB currently enrolled, di ba? So that he's in grad school mode, he gets to implement, and then he gets to do pioneering work, and then he's enrolled at DAP, so there are all sorts of professors advising him. Of course, we could be part of the advisory group, just so that kasi it's also very analytical, yung
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that might work as, so we yung parang master's thesis.
yeah.
We have that naman sa DAP. But I think we have to get them, so they start their term October. So tama lang because it's like June now.
Mhm.
We'd have to identify someone
Mhm.
um I guess October, ganyan.
Mhm.
At the start pa lang. Pero I think yung problem ko lang doon is their term kasi is only 2 years. So if mag-extend siya might be 3 years. I wonder if we get the results in just 2 years. You know, at
Mhm.
best we might be able to see what are the operational requirements, structure, etc. But would we be able to get the results in 2 years?
Right.
That's the only problem. Realistically, yung master's thesis, we only do it at year two na, because for year one you're just parang feeling around and
Yeah.
and
And then
trying to discover what the problems are.
if you're a fresh med school graduate, you're clueless, eh, di ba? Parang
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
but
So
if if we were able to work with DTTBs who are taking over from a previous DTTB who did their capstone on that same municipality, then there would be a better baseline.
yeah,
Tama
that
ba
would
yun?
be better. That would be better kung if that's the ang iniisip ko actually ay sometimes DTTBs, I don't know if they still do this, but sometimes DTTBs would be assigned as parang rural health physicians. So sometimes big municipalities or municipalities that cover like a large area, not necessarily large population, but a large area would have two facilities. And their mayor would make a request na I have a municipal health officer, but this other side of my island, it doesn't have a health practitioner. So could I maybe avail of that? So usually in that context, you at least have like a permanent person, like an MHO,
Oo nga, no? Oo.
right? But there is an additional incentive on the other physician, to do this, to ensure that this gets finished, because this would be part of their school work. So that
So
might be
there's
the
no
ideal.
discontinuity, di
Yeah,
ba?
that might be the ideal
Right.
scenario. But it's very few and far between, because there's a lot of doctorless areas, so they try not to assign in those areas, pero depende din yan sa current agency priorities ng DOH. Yeah, so I think there's definitely room to explore that
And
with
DTDB, the masteral program is now handled by
by
UP,
UP.
not
Yes. I don't
NAP
know
anymore, no?
how until until when.
Mhm.
Until when, because it usually rotates and then they have a bidding. But I think yes, currently it is handled by UP. So MPH sila ngayon, not anymore
Okay.
MPM. But they still need a thesis because that serves as the exit report as well. So they still do that.
So if we tried to catch the October intake of DTTB, we'd reach out to the dean of the MPH
CPH.
program,
Yeah.
CPH.
CPH now, yeah. I think CPH. I may need to check if it is I know that it's College of Public Health, pero I don't know if we talk to the dean of the College of Public Health or we talk to HHRDB. For our
Mhm.
collaboration. It might be both.
Yeah,
It might
yeah.
turn out to be both. But we'll reach out and see what's up with that. We can try and see. That
Mhm.
will be the ideal thing.
Mhm. So what do you think? Parang is this of interest institutionally to ignite impact and hybridyne to participate in the prototyping of this?
Yeah, sure. We just don't know what our role is going to be yet,
Mhm.
right? So, for Ignite Impact Fund, the fund, there would have to be an entity that we can fund, either the innovator, no, or if there's an NGO or something, and that would go through our usual process of evaluation. For Hybridyme as the consulting arm of Ignite, yeah, it's like any consulting process. We could aid in the impact, maybe in the impact framework, creating the impact framework around it, because it's going to be very no, parang conception stages pa lang. The impact framework, getting the stakeholders together, aligning their incentives so that there's a theory of change that's nice and communicable to the members of the group as well as to the general public, so that the project will survive its founders.
Mhm. Yeah.
So so yeah, we definitely, it's definitely one of our areas of interest, healthcare. We haven't done any bonds yet. So this will be an exciting first one if ever.
Oo. Kasi I understand that ano eh, no? There's a chicken and egg problem for this impact fund in health, no?
Mm.
Because yung DOH is led mostly by doctors. Diba? If they have master's degrees, it's mostly in epidemiology. So very few, a small subset feel comfortable or even aggressive or progressive dito sa financing. And then impact financing is still another layer of complexity. No? So since the USAID projects take their cue from DOH, then it could be a long wait before DOH
Mm.
starts instructing them to work on this. But as
Mm.
outsiders, we're outside of that chicken and egg loop. We can initiate something. We can initiate the conversation.
Mm.
Can talk to a DTTB.
Mm.
We might be able to raise 1 or 2 million pesos to
The
fund this,
finances, yeah. Finances.
finance this, and then, di ba, if we catch that, then we can bring on board DOH as advisors, maybe the regional director or the tuberculosis, so that will sort of pull the decision makers out of this, chicken and egg na antayan.
Yeah. I actually don't, I think it's changing now with the new, not with the new administration, huh? But I think with like more younger blood entering the department, I think the perspective is also shifting. Um but I tend to agree kasi if you're that huge, it's very difficult to be agile. So yeah, I think I think pwede naman. We can start small, progressive, an interested regional director maybe, or somewhere with, for example, in our region, TB impact, which I understand is impact, and what's their other name? Starts with PBSP, is it?
Yeah,
Philippine, yeah, PBSP,
Philippine Business Person.
yeah, they have a really big presence in Region 8, at least at the time that I was there, and a lot of projects, a lot of resources that we were able to access as well. So yeah, one of the recommendations nga in that recent report is to enable greater NGO participation. And allocate funding support to NGOs and CSOs working on TB, with this particular focus on the service delivery component, which is where I guess most of the market failure is
I
right
also
now.
know that the parang League of Corporate Foundations have adopted Agusan province
Mm.
as their convergence site. No? So we can
Oh,
also so I don't
which
know if you
one?
know,
Agusan del Norte
see
or?
where Jackie Momville is.
Yes, Jackie is my blockmate. My
Saan?
med school
Ay, med
med
school.
school
Ayun.
blockmate.
Yun, no? So we
My
can
med
also
school
float
block.
it. Di ba? From the design perspective naman, we are in many ways location agnostic, no, whether they do
Mm.
it in region 8 or
Yep.
Calabarzon or
Yeah. Yeah.
so we can just keep floating, ano floating the idea,
Idea. Yeah.
and then see where there's traction.
Mm.
And then it's not like we're promising them lots of funds, but just to start the discourse
Mm.
on
I think
this.
instead of just thinking about maybe we're floating the idea, it's also validating parts,
Right.
components of the business model. Like, is this really where the market need is? Is this really the appropriate like solution for appropriate instrument? Tama ba yung theory that if we improve case holding, this it will result to, you know, to this? Maybe there's another component we're not looking at. Ganyan.
Mhm.
I think segueing into that, maybe we can also look at who the innovators maybe. Jason's group definitely
Mhm.
one of the front runners, but are there any other TB innovators that you know of, Doc, na I don't know, that maybe, focused on that particular aspect, yung case holding? Because I'm actually not sure what Jason is doing.
Well, sina Jason run a small chain of clinics, TB
Um,
specific
so is it more
clinics,
detection or case
and
detection?
treatment. No, they
Mm.
are innovating in the service delivery side and the payment side so that they become ano ba? Sustainable from
Mm.
PhilHealth payouts, if I
Yun.
understood
So
right.
that might be perfect if they wanna go
Yes,
to
yes.
Agusan.
Oh nga, so I'm thinking yun, sina Jason, they have physical clinics, but they also have a knowledge base. No? And to me, the knowledge base, their knowledge capital, is a real resource. No? They know yung the nuts and bolts of treatment and electronic medical records, and they know how to monitor. So I think they can be a resource, even if remote, no? Because they're doing this institutionally. Yeah. Yung AIM Impact Investment Lab, di ba, do they have that in this batch?
Uh, I don't know.
Ah,
Baka si
okay.
Sir Wilfred knows
Well, I
Wilfred,
don't
better.
know. Because I don't teach MDM anymore, so I don't really know what's happening in MDM. Since
okay.
they changed MDM into a full-time load but part-time schedule, I I said, because I have a bad internet connection at home and it's like evening classes, so I cannot teach anymore. So,
Mm-hmm,
and it's
mm-hmm,
sad because I really think that MDM should really be a full-time course, but for the last so many years, except when it was made full-time, we only had like very few students because it's really costly to attend full-time studies.
mm-hmm,
You have to give up your job, and the job market in the Philippines is not really been doing well for the past so many years. So if you leave your job, then it will be difficult for you to get a job when you graduate from master's degree. And
mm-hmm,
so when it became part-time, we had like 50, 60 students, but of course it changed the the character of the MDM program. And so I don't know how the MDM program is right now.
mm-hmm. Okay.
But
Okay.
going back to what KM said, about how Ignite can participate in this pilot SIB for TB. Um, so if you don't know, if you haven't done any bond flotation, would it be do you give small grants, or do you help institutions get small grants?
We don't give grants, but we can help
Okay,
them. We can help them get
get
grants.
grants. Okay.
Mm-mm.
So let's say if this project can actually ask Ignite to help get some grants for this project, like a small pilot study.
Yeah. So the something that we're exploring is co-funding startups with yung PCHRD or the DOST startup schemes. So
Mm-hmm.
DOST has yung per council, the health council, the engineering council, agriculture council, they have like
Mm-hmm.
startup schemes. And sometimes the money from there isn't enough, or sometimes it's the requirement is higher. The requirement of the startup is higher than what they can propose. So we're
Mm-hmm.
exploring co-funding with the DOST in that regard. So far wala pang deal because we're the ones that we wanted to co-fund hindi makapasa dun sa DOST
Okay.
process.
Okay. Okay.
But the
Yeah.
DOST provides is a grant, so it's free money.
Grant as capital. Grant
Yes, you
as
can use it
seed.
as long as, yeah, as long as your startup has a research question,
Mhm,
basically,
Okay.
no? So as long as your startup has a research question, so it differs per council, but the highest, yung Engineering Emerging Technologies Council, they give out as high as 5 million pesos
for
Wow,
a
not bad.
startup.
for
Yeah,
a startup, which
yeah.
is really, really huge, no? Pero they deal with the space
That
tech
can
and stuff like that.
cover, yeah, that
So,
can cover like 2 years of salaries, you
mm,
know.
yes, and a lot of product dev, a lot of product dev, a lot of testing, etc. So as long as you have a research question, and this is basically the proposal flow is if can you prove that this money will propel your business forward, like either you get more customers because of the money or you launch a new product because of the money, etc. So basically that's your parang research question also. Then you can apply for the startup research grant. And we've been exploring parang co-funding, but so far no dice.
Yeah,
So
but
yeah.
yeah, it's kind of weird that the OST is focusing on financial viability of the startup and not really on the impact of the innovation on society. Meaning, there are innovations that can take a while to get traction, but they're nonetheless very important. So that if you don't invest in them at this early stage, you might just miss it. So I don't know why the OST is focusing too much on financial viability at this early stage when they should be investing in development or at least commercialization of basic research,
Mm-mm.
which might take longer. There's
Mm-mm.
a lot of literature in the economics of development regarding innovation as one of those determinants of long-term economic growth, especially for countries that are in the higher end of the productivity frontier, meaning
Mm-mm.
countries like Japan, US, Western
Mm-mm.
Europe, because innovation is the only way for them to grow. But countries like the Philippines, because we still lack a lot of factors of production like human capital, physical infrastructure, all these things, innovation may not be that important to our growth economic
Mm.
growth formula because we still need the inputs to production, roads, airports, train systems, um, better human capital, better institutions, less corruption, less red tape. But once we figure this out, then we are ready for the cutting edge economic growth, which is innovation. So I'm asking this because can we package the SIB as a startup I was just wondering if
Mm.
there is a financial startup that can actually present itself as an SIB finance startup, like a startup that looks into social services, health services, and that can partner with government so that in the long term it can improve the outcomes that government want to achieve, but at a fraction of the cost, meaning maybe 80% of the cost. So
Yeah,
I'm not
I'm
sure if this is a viable startup, but we can think,
off the top of my
along that
head.
line.
Off the top of my head, baka pwede, no? From the
Mm-mm.
financing
Mm-mm.
perspective, say a 3 million peso grant, no? And then for a TB startup or basta TB system startup, they can say, okay, I'll convert the 3 million pesos into 3,000 treated TB patients. Diba? The
Mm-hmm.
hypothesis there is I can treat 3,000 TB patients instead of the usual 2,000 TB patients for the regular per capita expense of DOH. So parang pwedeng ganun financially yung hypothesis, diba? I can treat TB patients for 60% less than DOH or the usual ano. And then of course internally that becomes like research funds for the startup. It will have to operationalize it and
Yeah,
use
that's also the research question, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. That
Yeah.
becomes their
That will
research
become the research
question.
question.
And then they'll have to figure out their secret sauce, di ba? Parang,
Yeah.
okay, how do we actually Diba?
What's the
Reduce cost
innovation
of
here?
treatment.
Yeah.
Not,
Yeah.
sige, I'll invest in technology, ganyan. And then they might fail. They'll say, ay, naku, no, for the 3 million pesos, we were only able to treat 2,500. But,
Yeah.
they document it. So it was like operational research. Di ba?
That's learning for potentially the SIB or
Yes,
the
because
bigger the
that would be
bigger
an
thing.
impact-centric research already.
Mhm. This is
Impact
financial
financing research.
innovation with social innovation on the intervention to better healthcare
Health
management.
outcomes, yeah.
Meaning, yeah, so meaning if this is financial innovation, but at the same time we're looking at behavioral social innovation on the patient's part. So if we can do this, let's say we package it as a research question, like we can even use this for other illnesses, other, you know, um, morbidities. I don't know, other things that the government spends a lot on, but haven't been quite successful in improving outcomes.